Alrighty, we're back with another faction guide. I didn't make these for a little bit because I wasn't sure when a patch would be coming out, but now that CA announced there's a new patch coming out on the 25th, we can still squeeze in a couple more of these before a patch makes me sound like a fool. Right, okay. If you haven't seen this series before, we try to make a video that is timeless until there's a DLC. Obviously, if you get new units, those units won't be on here, but we're talking about what each unit's function is on the roster, not what is necessarily strong in this patch 6.04, right? At the end, in case you're still playing quick battles on 6.04, or if not that much changes for Tzeentch in the patch, I will make a couple theoretical builds to show you how one is constructed, but this should help you even in the future to figure out what units do. All right, let's get into it. So for your Lord options, just give me multiple Lords, thank you. Most of them are casters. Tzeentch has an army passive based off of casting spells. If you cast spells, you get more army passive. So usually you want a nice and relatively cheap caster lord, and then to go wider with an army. I suppose that's not true in every matchup, but a melee lord is usually quite hard to justify because then you need to buy one of their hero casters, which can be rather expensive. So who even is just melee? I guess the Changeling and then the Chaos Lord. So we'll start with the Chaos Lord. Chaos Lord can do well on his disc mount. His disc has a teeny tiny little surface area, making him super tanky to things like missiles, projectile spells, and full surrounds. Not as many models can make contact with him on his tiny disc as compared to somebody on like a Dread Saurian. No Lord rides a Dread Saurian. Shut up. You get the point. Like the bigger the mount, the more danger you're in. So his disc makes him very tanky, and he is a solid anti-large duelist. His items aren't very good, and some of his buffs and debuffs are okay, but he does come at a decently high price point. He can cut his pretty bad items and maybe cut like this one. Still 1,800 gold. That's why you don't tend to see him a lot. Maybe he gets buffs in the future or whatever, but it is just kind of an anathema not to take a caster lord on the roster with some of the best caster lords in the game. So you don't see a lot of him just because he's kind of asynergistic, but like he himself is actually okay. For the other not guaranteed caster lord, we do have the Changeling. The Changeling is a caster, but what I mean is he can transform himself into any lord or hero in the game pretty much. And not all of them will be a caster, so some of the times he's a caster, some of the times he's not. The Changeling's strength relies in the versatility he can bring to your roster that someone isn't expecting. Like, if you're playing against, you know, dwarves, you know their lord is going to be infantry-sized or Thoric on his anvil or whatever, but like they're not going to have a caster. You need armor piercing, you need strong anti-infantry dueling stats to deal with dwarves, right? And the Changeling, if he is ever meta and his cost isn't crazy high, he can just bring that versatility. Like all of a sudden, this is one that people actually do, is all of a sudden you have to prep for a Kugath Plaguefather Drain Blob, which you're not used to thinking of when you deal with Tzeentch. So that is a little different. And then some of the undead matchups, you can bust out Herald Hammerstorm that people aren't ready for, and all of a sudden he has that ability to make undead not undead anymore. So yeah, the only thing holding the Changeling back from being meta is his price point. If you're on a patch where he is nice and cheap for his transformation cost, then he can be relatively worth it. And if he's too expensive, then he's not worth it. On to the Caster Lords, here meat and potatoes for this roster. Least common is the Demon of Tzeentch. He does have a decent little hybrid lore between Metal and Tzeentch. Some good spells in here. A lot of what holds him back on the current patch is his high price point, but he has good melee stats. He is a demon, so he's relatively tanky and scary. He's a flying combat lord, all those things. He has a lot of abilities. Some are good, some really aren't. Just a bit pricey on the current patch, but can be a good jack of all trades caster lord, because you can have an Exalted Lord change of Metal and Tzeentch, but not a hybrid. So he's like the third option, the hybrid one. So if these particular spells are strong on the patch you're on, he's a solid choice. He's fine. One of the things that does keep him out of contention with his cousins currently is they have a very nice Fury summon. It has gotten nerfed several times. It used to be 2 uses, and then Fury's got nerfed since then, but now it is 1 use. It's still pretty good. A lot of their abilities you can just cut if you don't want them, but Metal and Tzeentch are both amazing lures for different reasons. Both have really good Lord sniping and crowd clearing, just different spells. Blue Fire versus Final Representation, or Searing Doom versus Infernal Gateway, so it's like you can kind of switch out the price for what you want. But two really good lures of magic, again, a solid duelist, and these guys have armor piercing, where actually the Demon Prince of Tzeentch for some reason doesn't have a majority armor piercing. But these guys are your best duelist casters. Is the Exalted Lord of Change. Kairos, flipping over, is the exact same, but he is a significantly worse duelist while being a better caster. So he is that bird model. We've had, you know, Mr. Middle of the Road, and then your better combat one, and now you have your best casting one. So Kairos, worst of the combatants, but he has really good abilities for decreasing his cooldowns. He has some of the best combinations of Winds of Magic generation in the game. If you just spam out Blue Fire with life leeching and then the tier 1 Tzeentch army passive, he can get literally infinite Winds of Magic, and it's pretty nuts if the game goes on crazy long. His hybrid spell lures, again, similar to the other Demon Prince, makes him meta depending on if his spells he has are currently good. Pendulum's not in the best place in this patch. Barona's Time Warp's pretty bad in this patch, so you usually just see him as a Blue Fire spammer, maybe Glean Magic. He's incredibly tanky, and he does have a net, though, so that's pretty darn good. I don't think the regular guy has a net. Why did I just click on Kairos again? That's not helpful. Yeah, the regular guy doesn't have the net. Kairos does. Zarthoriel recently got a cool rework, so he is now entirely different than the other bird lords. He is only metal, but he does have some nice buff and debuff stuff. He himself is a pretty whatever combatant. He's fine. He's similar to the Exalted Lord of Change, but I'd rather have them because of their Fury summon. For like a 1v1, getting the Furies to surround somebody and beat them up is pretty good. But Zarthoriel is the best at supporting cavalry engagements, or like Centaur's Tzeentch. His Rock of Inevitability is very nice, Standard Eye is very nice as well, so him landing in the middle of a cavalry or melee engagement that's already happening and popping his buffs is very good. I keep mentioning cavalry because I think the minus 25% speed is really good at getting things stuck. Like, oh crap, we got to get out of here. Oh, we're too slow, and the Centaurs of Tzeentch just keep up with us, or the Chaos Knights keep up with us, and they keep hitting us in the back. Infantry, they're not going to really run away, so the speed isn't as impactful. I think the cavalry fights are a little better. If you want to go all in, too, you could throw down Plague of Rust with him as well. So your Chaos Knights, who have high weapon strength but no armor piercing, you can overcast Plague of Rust as he's landing and debuff their stats and absolutely annihilate some heavy cav. So, yeah, he is a solid fighter, but I think he's better in a larger fight, whereas the other Exalted Lord is a little better at 1v1 than he is. Tzeentch overall doesn't have the best true 1v1 lords, though. Like, no one on this roster is going to 1v1 Scarbrand and win. Onto your smaller caster lords, we have Village the Curseling. He can be very nice in the way that Sigvald the Magnificent used to be nice. If you want your lord to be low to the ground, low profile, regenerating, tanky, he's very, very good at that, and he can be taken at a relatively low price point. You don't want to take Blue Fire with him. I see this all the time. It doesn't work. Blue Fire from a foot caster has a terrible angle. Half your projectiles hit the ground before they reach their target. It's just not good. So he can't use one of the more popular spells, which is a bit tricky, but he's still good if you want to spam out. Infernal Gateway is very good against elite infantry. There it is. Treason of Tzeentch is good for breaking through like a Skaven front line. So he still has spells he can use, but the big reason you want to take him is Twisted Twin. Gives him more melee stats as he grinds through random chaff. And then Paragon of Change, that's the one. Yes, it's constant. That's just constant barrier regen, which is just like health regen, you know? So with his high stats, I usually cut Vessel of Chaos. You don't need it. And then cut Fires of Change. But anyway, I digress. With decently high melee stats, they can get up to 65-65, and then constant regenerating barriers. He can just be super tanky in the front line for relatively cheap. I mean, look at him. If you take one spell, Infernal Gateway, boom. He's 1,500 gold. He's tanky like Sigvald. Unlike Sigvald, he can't kill an entire army or beat anybody in a duel, but, you know, he's fine. And by anybody, sorry, I shouldn't say anybody. Anybody, I mean, select the whole roster and he'll beat them. Anybody, like, that sounds like he won't win against a single person. No, he can win versus a lot of other casters and stuff. Decent into Skaven, though. Also, some of your big spooky flying lords are pretty good there. Another very popular caster is the Mortal Chaos Sorcerer Lord of Tzeentch. Mostly just a supportive caster, very, very bad at melee combat, but he does come with a Chaos Spawn summon, which can be very useful. Metal and Tzeentch, two good lures again, and he can get that Disc of Tzeentch we talked about earlier with the Dueling Lord. Similar things apply. It makes him crazy tanky in melee and resistant to a lot of missile attacks. He or Village are really good options into Skaven, because Skaven usually go pretty anti-air into Tzeentch, and his teeny tiny little profile and his Disc will make him hard for Rattling Gunners and stuff to hit. Herald of Tzeentch is the final caster. The best besides Kairos at Winds of Magic generation. He can be kind of cheap, but the reason you don't see this guy a lot is he is demonic and he has a crazy low HP pool. So if your opponent has really good single target spells like Spirit Leech or Final Transmutation, Flensing Ruin, Rance of Visitations, or anything, he's pretty doomed. And his insanely low armor point makes him weak to basic skirmish fire. So you do have to keep him a little safe. I like him in some matchups, but he requires a bit of hand-holding, and he's not as cheap as you'd like. Maybe on future patches, the heralds of every roster will get a cost decrease, but right now, he just pays too much for too low of melee stats. For some reason, like, CA really cost increases the heralds for being demonic as if it's a good thing for your lord to die on their own. So it's tough. It's tough to justify his high price point. Like, literally with... He has an 800 base price point, no spells. That's pretty darn high. So hopefully they, decrease his base cost in the future. But he has really, really, really good Winds of Magic regeneration and power reserves. So he can get out a lot of spells very quickly. On to the heroes. Iridescent Horror is one of the most useless characters in the entire game. He is about as expensive as the Herald is for some reason. I mean, 550 is not cheap for having no spells. He has a pretty bad locus of change. He's a metal or a Tzeentch caster, but so is usually your lord. It's the only reason you would take this guy is if you took the only Tzeentch lord that isn't a caster, and then for some reason you didn't want to take two other casters who are better. I don't know. He's just terrible. There's literally no reason to take him. And this isn't like but what about when he's good? This type of character just won't be good on this roster ever. I don't know what they could do to make him relevant, because he is entirely redundant. For your other casters who aren't demonic and won't kill themselves at the first drop of a hat, you have the Chaos Sorcerer of Tzeentch, who is a better combatant and a better caster than the Iridescent Horror. Skull of Catan can give you a pretty sick single spell combo. And he does have a pretty funny thing that he gives magic attacks to a roster that has entirely magic attacks, but you also have to remember he's also on the Warriors of Chaos roster, so that item is for that roster, not this one. If you ever take this item while you're on Tzeentch, you're trolling. It gives magic attacks on a roster where literally everything has magic attacks. Do not bring this item, unless you're on the Warriors of Chaos. But he can have the Chaos Warshrine mount, which can give a lot of Winds of Magic, and I believe it gives you more... power. Yeah, gives you reserves per second too, so he can be nice in like a spell blob type build. Metal and Tzeentch again, the two lores, still pretty good, still very good caster, and if you take the Chaos Lord, he's usually accompanied by this guy. Finally, a non-redundant caster. Now I might be like, hey, you shit on the Iridescent Horror. The Chaos Sorcerer of Metal is a better combatant than this guy. Why would you ever take the Cult of Tzeentch, human boy? Tell me he's shit too, human boy. Why isn't everybody just shit, human boy? Cult of Tzeentch brings a different lore of magic, giving him a reason to exist, Iridescent Horror. If you had any options that the main lords didn't have, you might be taken someday. So if you really want a Firecaster for like the Tomb Kings matchup, it is actually a decent and common combo to go with the Chaos Lord with his Halberd and then grab the Cultist with Burning Head, just because Burning Head is so good versus the Tomb Kings. He also has the Wand of Whimsy. It's Wurzag's old Squiggly Beast, I think it is? No, crap, what is this thing? I used to use it all the time. Bonewood Staff. Global plus 12 melee attack and base weapon damage. It can be nice for a super wide infantry rush build whenever those are popular or meta. So this guy has some unique supportive things, some unique spell lores that make him sometimes viable. He's niche. He is good. I don't think he needs buffs. It's just the nature of being a hero caster on the best caster roster means you got to be niche to survive, and he's chilling. He does have a pink horror summon, but pink horrors are like an archer unit, so they take a long time to get their value out, and a summon usually wears off before they're going to do that. So usually you don't want his summon. If you're going with a super wide build, you can keep the Wand of Whimsy and just get like Cascading Fire Cloak and Fireball, or Flaming Sword of Ruin in Fireball or something. But if you're doing the Wand of Whimsy, you really want to keep cheap spells. So if you're going to grab like just Burning Head or just Flamestorm, don't bother with the Wand of Whimsy because you're going to get like 3 casts off all game and it's not worth it. So anyway, if you're doing just Burning Head, you can cut that. And look, even on a horse, he's 950. That's crazy. That's crazy, Iridescent Horror, that he's that freaking cheap. I'll stop pooping on the Iridescent Horror. For your final caster hero, you have the Blue Scribes. Blue Scribes, again, survive on a roster full of casters by being a meme. They're generally pretty bad. They're just kind of a meme unit, but they have one fun thing that's actually just fun about them. I have no complaints about it, is they get random spells from the entire game. Doesn't matter if Tzeentch has access to the spells or not. So you can have some fun, quick battles, you know, you're just vibing after a long day. Take a Blue Scribes, see what silly spells and combos you can get, have a good time. They're fine, they're fun. It's hard to say they're going to be competitively viable, though, when you don't know what you're getting. Competitive builds don't like randomness. Like, that's just not a thing. Generally, RNG is not something you want to bank on if you're really trying to win a game. Exalted Hero of Tzeentch has Book of Secrets. It's a 3-time spell cast, which is weird because I just said RNG doesn't usually win you games, and this is another example of it. Enfeebling Foe, Withering Heat, and Fate of Buna all want to be used on very different targets for very different reasons, so it is difficult to take that and get guaranteed value. Most people, if Fate of Buna is overpowered, which it currently is, just take it and keep casting it on targets that they want to hit with Fate of Buna and hope they get the spell they wanted. So just throw it at expensive cavalry, I guess. But yeah, that one's not very good if the patch you're on, Fate of Buna, isn't overpowered. Other than that, I don't know, man. He can be an okay duelist. Yeah, sometimes I see 2 of them as like a goon squad. Tzeentch has pretty bad monsters. We'll get to that later. As far as melee monsters go, they have pretty bad monsters. So if you have to counter an enemy blob of some kind with big monsters and you need duelists of your own, these guys are cheap and chipper halberds on discs that can hunt down those monsters and take them out. Probably cut Beating the Minds and assume command. Just keep Colossal Strike. 1400 is a lot to pay for these guys, but again, if you're dealing with a monster blob and you just have to have them, they can do okay. And finally is Aecold. Sigvald Light does just have constant healing of his own, Breath of Life, that keeps his vigor up and his HP. You can generally cut him down to his cheapest price point, and then he's just a slow, grinding infantry character that'll never die. Useful versus dwarves. He's useful if you just need a foot duelist running around. He's fine. No real complaints about Aecold. Alright, on to the faster part of the build, because heroes and lords have a lot going on. Infantry, it's pretty easy to lump them together. So, let's lump them together. Your chaff infantry is the Marauders. You have Marauders of Tzeentch, Marauders of Tzeentch with spears. They are relatively overcosted for what they give you, because this roster's light infantry is pretty bad. It's supposed to be pretty bad, so they're pretty bad. You need to take them if you need a front line of some kind and don't have a lot of money left. Both these guys are pretty piss poor, so limit how much you need them. Spear variant, obviously better against large targets. Axe and shield, a little better against front lines, but bronze shields and 15 armor means they're going to die to anything. And they have decent melee attack, melee defense stats, but it just doesn't feel like they really get that much out of it. So they're chaff. They're not great. You take them if you have to. Blue Horrors. Now, this is one of the first things that I wanted to mention. No matter what patch you're on, do not treat Blue Horrors like archers. They have 4 ammunition. They are great units. They are excellent units. No one's complaining about them, but they are more like miners with blasting charges or infernal Ironsworn than they are like elven archers. And so, you might tunnel too much on the infernal Ironsworn and the miners with blasting charges. You're like, no, dude, miners have so much armor. No, shut up. That's not what I'm talking about. They have a ranged attack, but that's not their primary function. Blue Horrors need to run up, shoot their range attack, and then sprint into melee. When I see people take a front line of Marauders and a secondary line of Blue Horrors, and they're counting on the Blue Horrors to do range damage, that is just incorrect. That is not going to work. This unit does not have enough damage, enough range, or enough ammunition to be a reliable damage source. So now you have 2 layers of chaff units, and there's not enough carry potential. There's not enough damage in that build, and then it'll just get ground out, and people are like, why isn't this working? It's like, because you're using the unit wrong. And another thing to think about with the Blue Horrors is similar to skirmish cavalry, where you don't have to stop and shoot. If the opponent, let's just say, they didn't take a front line. This is a stupid example, but I'm trying to just get a point out here. They didn't take a front line. You can skip standing and firing because you don't want to trade shots with archers. Like, you shoot at archers, archers shoot at you, you shoot at archers. You can just run at the archers. Like, you can just skip the part where you shoot at them, right? And that can be helpful if you have marauders take on the regular front line and the blue horrors are going around the sides. And if they don't have anyone on the sides to stop you, you can just harass the archers with these guys and run straight at them. But yeah, you don't have to stop and shoot, and sometimes it is actively the incorrect decision to do so. It's usually correct to shoot first, because why not? But if for some reason you have a clear shot to the enemy range, like a cannon or something like that, these guys are great. Also, if you're getting skirmished, enemy skirmish cavalry does not want to trade with blue horrors. They have barriers to absorb the first couple shots. They'll fire back, do some decent damage. So blue horrors are great, just don't use them like an archer. They're a really good weird anti-skirmish unit. The Chromatic Abominations are an archer. The ROR of the Blue Horrors is an archer unit. It has way more ammunition, better missile strength, and then it has a barrier boost whenever people are using spells or spells are active near them. They are also a hybrid melee infantry, but these guys you think of more as Kossars with spears than as miners with blasting charges. So it's a little weird, where it's like they can defend themselves in melee, but they should use all of their ammunition as a priority over charging into melee. Whereas the regular blue horrors should focus on melee if there's no good targets. Anyway, it's tricky. It's tricky. For the rest of you, let's group Chaos Warriors. So, you have your mid-tier infantry, Zongors and Forsaken of Tzeentch. Both are a little more aggressive than your Chaos Warriors. Forsaken of Tzeentch can do a lot of damage, and they have Frenzy. They usually need to be paired with Chaos Spawn. Chaos Spawn and Forsaken hybrid rushes are very strong, because the high weapon strength of the Forsaken is not armor piercing, but Chaos Spawn of Tzeentch have armor sundering. So these guys can be good as a really aggressive front line, but they need a bit of that support, or Plague of Rust being cast from your metal caster, or spamming blue fire on the front line if you would, to get that, like, there's the little passive on blue fire that reduces armor. So Forsaken needs you to help them out with the armor, but they'll carry you after that. Zongors are cheaper, faster, Vanguard, and a little tankier than the Forsaken of Tzeentch. Still do more damage than your Marauders, but they're also tankier than your Marauders. They're not as tanky as a Chaos Warrior, so they're your kind of middle step between Marauder and Chaos Warrior, while Forsaken is on an entirely different ladder. So these are still more defensive than damage dealing. They'll run up. I'm not saying defensive like form a box of Zongors. I'm just saying Zongors won't like blitz through a front line. Oh my god, so much damage. That's the Forsaken's job. These guys, tanky and chipper. Chaos Warriors, two variants. We have the Sword and Board and we have the Halberd. Both are tanky and slow. Both will grind through a front line, but they want a longer game. The Halberds are just there in case you're dealing with primarily large targets, and the Sword and Board are there if you're dealing with primarily infantry. And then the Chosen of Tzeentch is the upgraded version of the Chaos Warriors. Incredibly tanky, very elite, very slow, and very expensive. Good at killing the enemy if you know it's going to be a knockdown, drag out melee fight. I see a lot of Chosen with Tzeentch of Halberds versus like Bretonnia. But if the enemy has access to armor piercing missiles, good chariots, big monsters, generally the Chosen are going to have a bad time. Chosen of Tzeentch with Halberds do a little better versus monsters, but we're not in a place right now in the game, and unless the mechanics change wildly, big monsters are currently really good at cycle charging through Halberds. In PvP. Campaign, big monsters are going to sit in your halberds, they're going to die. But in PvP, a lot of players are going to make sure to avoid your halberds, and then you're just too slow to keep up. So, yeah. Chosen of Tzeentch, just bring them if your opponent doesn't have any access to armor-piercing missiles or good chariots. And the Severed Claws, final. Aspiring Champion ROR from the Warriors of Chaos. They're a little weird. Their teeny tiny model count makes them incredibly tanky to a lot of the things that would normally kill Chosen. And they have very similar HP to Chosen while only having 16 models, if you look at that. So that makes them ridiculously hard to kill. Their damage output is insanely low, but they can be a good little Lord bodyguard for like Village, or they can be a nice constant grinding force that your Flying Lord can always rely on to hold the ground while they cast spells over and over again without getting the, all your ground units are dead, flying unit debuff. So, Severed Claw are good. Missile Infantry. There's 4 of them. Pink horrors of Tzeentch are just like archers. Again, think more like Kossars with spears than true like peasant archers or something. These guys can do okay in melee. Decent-ish melee stats, decent-ish weapon strength, physical resistance, they'll do okay. Most heavy cav will still plow through them. The Sour Guts, however, have enough melee stats to hold their own, and then they have that little explosion they do when they die. So they can actually mess up a lot of cavalry that come for them, and it's just kind of a bad trade for your opponent. Like, I have to shut this down, but I'm going to take so much damage, it really sucks, and they take a long time to die. But they're high leadership, so... Sour Guts are quite solid. I end up taking them in most of my builds right now. Exalted Pink Horrors are just kind of terrible. They're one of the things I put on my like range units tier list at the bottom. Now, maybe they get buffed in the future, but their whole purpose is to just be a better Pink Horror. So for you to be able to take these guys, they need to have significant missile strength over the Pink Horror, and as of right now, they don't. But in the future, if you have 50% more missile strength than the Pink Horror, or if they get armor piercing, then that's when you take these guys. And then you can just treat them like any other elite archer in the game, like in situations where you would take Sisters of Avalorn, in situations where you would take Ice Guard or something like that, you can take Exalted Pink Horrors, they're fine. I would not take them for the gimmick of their melee stats. That is wildly overrated, and you're paying too much for that. This guy you need to take if you need a specific elite archer, and again, in the future, hopefully they have armor-piercing shots or something. Blazing Squealers, a little better, because they do have the Warp Flames, so they give themselves 10% more damage, because fire damage, and minus 10 armor on the enemy. That is better. They still have good weapon strength and all that stuff, but they do have Conduit of Infinity. It gives a bit of ammunition around. Not that much, but it does give a bit of ammo, so that's kind of okay. They're very niche. A lot of people use them if they're trying to like use Changebringers and get something else, a lot more ammunition, but generally they're quite expensive. Cavalry and chariots. Dun, 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 dun. You have one chariot. It's a Chaos Chariot of Tzeentch. It's a basic chariot. Disrupts a lot of light infantry. It has incredibly low weapon strength with low armor piercing, so it's not good at all versus heavy infantry, but it's good at disrupting light infantry formations. Centaurs of Tzeentch are your anti-heavy cav killers. Significant armor piercing, but relatively low melee stats, relying on Primal Fury and some buffs from you. Arcane Charge gives them 20% more damage if you get a bunch of spells off, but yeah, these guys need to get a counter charge on heavy cavalry. If they take a charge, they'll take a lot of damage quite quickly, as their stats are super low. Your anti-light cavalry, plus anti-everything else, is your Chaos Knights, the backbone of a lot of Tzeentch mobility. Chaos Knights are incredibly tanky, and with their barriers, they can often back off and regenerate a bunch of HP before jumping back into the fight. Very high melee stats, incredibly high armor. These guys do a lot of work for you. They just need a bit of support if you want them to do any damage. Like I said earlier in the video, Plague of Rust or Zarthoriel jumping down to help them out or something. Otherwise, they'll hold. They'll hold forever without you, but if you want them to kill stuff, you need to help them out, because that's not what they're going to do. Lance's variant just loses some tankiness to get some extra charge bonus. It's fine if you think you're going to get a lot of charges onto Embrace things. Doom Knights of Tzeentch, not that much damage out of these guys. They're pretty terrible at dueling other things in the sky due to their non-armor piercing weapon strength and whatever melee stats. But they are all flying on discs, making them incredibly tanky versus ranged fire. They are disruptors. They are Chaos Furies that never die. They can fly into enemy ranged formations and just disrupt 2 or 3 units at the same time if you micro them correctly, and they'll just hang around forever. They'll be there at the end of the game helping you out. So they're very tanky, they're very expensive, but use them wisely and they will save your front line a lot of damage from those ranged units. Knights of Immolation, just a better version. They do have a rock drop type ability, Searing Torment, to damage people beneath them. Other than that, just better stats. Fire damage as well. Still not very good at surrounding single entities or dueling with other flyers. That is something I see a lot, is people try and like get this goon squad going. And the Knights of Immolation just don't do that much damage against single entities in the sky. It's not really their dig. Missile Cavalry. Marauder Horsemen of Tzeentch, very strong skirmish cavalry on the ground. With their Warp Flame, again, they can give themselves 10% more damage and reduce the armor of the enemy, making it easier for their non-armor piercing missile strength to get through. 700 gold for a barriered missile cav is quite nice, because you can run forward, trade volleys, and then back off and get your berries back, and then do it again. And you come back at full HP while your opponent lost real health and they lose real health every time. So if you micro them well, Marauder Horseman of Tzeentch can do a ton of damage. Changebringers, super squishy, incredibly expensive, and terrible in melee, but they will Shrek anything if they get a nice mid or short range volley on it. They'll kill infantry, cavalry, single entities. They'll kill anything if you keep them safe from other flying melee units or from archers of any kind. Any sort of ranged unit at all will hit these guys and do a ton of damage to them, but if you protect them, they can carry entire games. If your opponent has bad air and ranged assets, you can just kind of form a ground-based blob with some Chosen, take a couple Changebringers, and just win the game off of air cheesing. They are incredibly powerful, but need so much hand-holding. Burning Chariot is less that way. It does good damage. It mostly gets its damage out these days from the little vortexes it spawns on its missile strength, so it is often advantageous to have it fire at blobs, or to have it just charge in with fire at will on, and it'll shoot whatever's around itself and just cause a bunch of mayhem. It is pretty expensive. You don't want to get it into single entity duels. You also don't want to let it get stuck in heavy cavalry, but light cavalry or any form of infantry, the Burning Chariot of Tzeentch can just go burr and keep firing its little gun at them, so it's pretty good nowadays. Monsters and beasts. We're getting there. A lot of options. A lot of terrible options. Chaos Warriors of Tzeentch, necessary backline disruptor, though they are very squishy and very expensive. Do not throw these things to their death for no reason. If they die, it has to be a sacrifice. I see way too many times people throw their Furies at the enemy archers before their front line has even engaged the enemy. Then the Furies die. You lost 1,300 or 2,600 gold before the real fight even began, and the archers are back online anyway. You got to time your charge appropriately with these guys, where it's like frontline hits, archers got maybe one, maybe two volleys off, and then the Furies need to go in. Or the Chaos Knights start to disrupt, and then the Chaos Furies go in or something. If you just throw the Furies in, they are so expensive. They're just dead, and you wasted all that gold. Screamers of Tzeentch are really good cav support. They pair quite nicely with Chaos Knights, because Chaos Knights are, as we said, tanky, non-armor piercing. You can have those guys get in a fight, and Screamers just lurking above, and as soon as someone commits to fighting your Chaos Knights, these guys dive in from behind, use their armor piercing anti-large, and get that rear attack in, and tear some people up. They're very, very nice for that. Relatively cheap, still flying units. They can protect your Changebringers or something, get you a bit of aerial dominance. Shrieking Skyrays, just those guys with better stats, and they have the Lamprey's Bite, good at clearing out light infantry and not much else. And then we have Spawn of Tzeentch. I mentioned before, but they are really good at supporting Forsaken ground-based rushes. Mass, high damage, low armor piercing, but they do have their own armor sundering. They're unbreakable and whatnot. Just not very tanky, and they don't do well without good damage-dealing infantry, which is why you see them paired with Forsaken so often. They have high weapon strength, but like they just don't churn well on their own. They need Forsaken to keep the buzzsaw rolling. The weird spawn, however, higher stats, and they have terror. That can make them very nice. I sometimes throw weird spawn in even with Marauder rushes just to have a cheap source of terror on the ground that's unbreakable and will stay into the late game. Good versus Skaven and Beastmen mostly. Weird spawn are solid. Cockatrice, it's just weird. Now this is the part where we mention what a monster can be good at and not complain about how it currently is. The problem with the Cockatrice I see is I don't see how it can be good with its current animation set. This thing suffers so hard from having one of those like too pretty to function animation sets. I've dove it on some dwarves. I was fighting dwarves and I dove it on their lord to get a quick charge in. And then it does this thing where it like starts prancing forwards like it's Nakai light. And I'm like, what are you doing? And it just gets itself completely surrounded in slayers. I'm like, well, get out of there. And then it's like, oh, I don't have the mass to push through the slayers. Oh, I'm just dead. I'm like, well, you killed yourself. Of course you're dead. But like, maybe they crazy up its stats, maybe they decrease its cost. Its use would be a flying terror-causing support monster. Its melee stats aren't good enough to be a real duelist, but it does have a one-time use slow that turns into a net. It does have poison, so it can kind of do some of that stuff, but yeah, it's not supposed to be a duelist. It's like a flying companion to one of your Lords of Change or something. It's supposed to be supportive. Chaos War Shrine of Tzeentch, just the War Shrine mount, but without a hero on top of it. If you cast spells, oh no, it's stuff dying. Got it. They must have changed that. So yeah, if people die near it, you get more Winds of Magic recharge and reserves and spell mastery, as long as you can keep it alive. it's okay, but you'd probably want to throw a hero on it to give it better stats. The Lords of Change. Everything I had to say about the Lords of Change, but not as good. They're not as good of duelists. They have some bound spells, but one blue Fire of Tzeentch and one pink Fire of Tzeentch isn't that impressive right now. So hopefully they get more casts of those things. And at 1,500 gold, 30 armor, and 7,000 HP is hard to justify. They can be good if you have a specific single entity goon squad disruption you want to do. The Golden Griffin of Theurgy is a bit better because you can see compared to his base guy, he has 60 armor increase, so he's up to 90. That's actually decent. So 30 armor, pathetic. 90 armor, no, you're talking about something. Searing Doom again has Golden Hounds, bound spells instead, so he's a metal version. But the higher melee stats, the different spells can come into effect there if you want a slightly better duelist guy. Finally, you have the Mutalith Vortex Beasts, Aesion the Fallen, and the regular one. These are fast Mortis Engine infantry clearing monsters in theory. They're good if you expect a blob fight. They're good if you expect your opponent to spam light infantry and not have a lot of archers. They are very weak to archers. Keep them away from any ranged capacity at all. Artillery, well, like cannons, not like Hellstorm rocket batteries, but, you know, single entity damaging artillery, ranged units of all kinds, skirmish cav, anything like that will mess up the Mutalith Vortex Beast. But if you just have a melee fight in mind, he's probably your guy. And then Aesion the Fallen has slightly increased stats and one more chaining damage ability that doesn't do that much damage currently, but maybe they'll buff it. Finally, missile monsters. Whew. You have Flamers. These are your ground-based, kind of like Warp Fire Thrower teams, but a monstrous infantry. They do a lot of damage if you can get a good side shot on. They just have weird arcs of fire, so aim carefully with them, and they're incredibly squishy. They're just like Changebringers on the ground, actually. Very squishy to range fire, keep them away from that at all costs, and in melee, they also die instantaneously. Exalted Flamer of Tzeentch is much more of a kiting tool, a single entity, so it's pretty good at scooting and shooting. Does spawn little vortexes like the Burning Chariot of Tzeentch. Still crazy weak to archers and pretty darn weak to light cav or heavy cav that catch it, so you gotta keep it safe, but it is a kiting tool. And the Soul Grinder, single entity kiting tool, mostly good at killing large single entities like himself, and then afterwards he's kind of a decent melee combatant terror causing unit, but mostly useful for lord or hero sniping, killing the enemy casters so they can't cast spells, things like that. Part of kite builds. Woo! I think Tzeentch has one of the bigger rosters in game 3 because that was actually a lot to go through. Damn. All right, let's talk about some builds, huh? Nurgle. I'm not gonna cheese Nurgle. There are ways to cheese Nurgle, like taking Changebringers and whatnot, but I'm not gonna do that. You can, I'm not gonna. So let's just do something else entirely. Nurgle, let's take Kairos. He's pretty good. I'm gonna get rid of Staff tomorrow. I don't need it, so let's get Life Leeching. You could take Fires of Change. I'm not gonna bother. Great Arc and Conduit. Yes, take that. But here's the big one. I want Oracle of Eternity in case Nurgle takes Rants of Visitations. I can save this so whenever he casts it, I get 44% damage resistance against his Rants of Visitations, which Nurgle will take against Tzeentch sometimes because Tzeentch doesn't have healing, so there's not much they can do about that. Gaze of Fate, the net is always pretty good, and then Scroll of Destiny, sure, I'll take that. Cut all my spells and take just blue fire, and then you're good to go. Pretty expensive, but you do really want Oracle of Eternity in case of Rants Visitations. You could argue that you can take off Gaze of Fate. You could argue that you can take off the Scroll of Destiny to save some money, but I do think you need everything else that I have here. So Kairos is a bit spendy, but you kind of need it to keep your Lord alive. After that, I really like Horror Spam versus Nurgle. This will take care of any demonic units, any demonic infantry, rot flies, angels of decay, Kugath Plaguefather himself. These guys are enough to deal with all that. So now we know the rest of our build has to deal with enemy mobility and heavy infantry. Gotcha. So we'll take 4 skirmish cav. Really good at still shooting Kugath, but also harassing enemy cavalry or something like that. Still have a lot of pink horrors and blue horrors to get some more of that, so we're a little wider. But I really like the horror spam build versus old Nurgle. So now what? Heavy infantry are still going to be a problem. Got it. Could do Exalted Flamer. Then I have 100 gold somewhere, we'll get to that, but yeah, you could do this. So this could kite Nurgle pretty heavily with blue fire spam from Kairos. All these blue and pink horrors can punish a blob or any demonic units, and then if they have heavy infantry they're just going to waddle at you, your Exalted Flamer can kill infinite amounts of them. This is a little weak to heavy cav rush from Nurgle, but it can work because you could use Gaze of Fate to net one of his heavy cav in a bad position, and then have everything shoot at it, kill it off, and then continue kiting away, sacrificing maybe a Marauder Horseman here or there whenever Nurgle catches you, and wait for your next net. So you could hard kite Nurgle out like that. Another way to do it, if you don't feel like kiting out his heavy cav, we could still take this core, and we could take a Burning Chariot. Though I worry about Rancid Visitations on the Burning Chariot. You could take that to cycle charge through any heavy infantry that come near you. And then for, well, here, if you're already weak to Rancid Visitations, you could do the Sartorial combo instead. So get rid of all these, get Rock of Eternity, get these, and then take just Final Transmutation. Well, no, let's do Plague of Rust. Okay, Plague of Rust, Searing Doom. Those are two good ones. So with this, we could take double Chaos Knight. Ooh, or a Chaos Knight and a Centaur, but we'll do double Chaos Knight for now. Cut that. Maybe now we can get a Centaur. Yeah, that could be okay. These are still really good against blobs. Maybe cut one pink horror, one blue horror. Get some Zongors just for a bit more oomph. But this is something else you could do if you're worried about heavy cav from Nurgle. You, on one side, pair the Chaos Knight of Tzeentch with a Centaur of Tzeentch, and like Chaos Knight takes the charge and the Centaur wraps around and loops them. And then on the other side, have Sartorial supporting this one. So when this one takes the charge, you throw down Rock of Inevitability and Standard Die, Plague of Rustum, and then have Sartorial help these guys chase down the heavy cav. Something like that can be pretty good. So these are two builds that could work versus Nurgle. It depends. Before Nurgle got a DLC, this used to be a hard counter matchup he couldn't play. Now it's difficult for Nurgle, but they have some options, so now you do too. All right, next up, let's just grab something random. Oh, I tried to click somewhere, but we got Lizardmen. Okay. Armored single entities and a lot of chaff infantry. Yeah, that is pretty different. Let me think. Oh, okay. Yeah, we can do that. So we're really scared of like single entity blobs. So we're gonna grab double disc heroes. Their halberd stats, those are pretty good. Now, because I did that, I want a nice and cheap caster. Could do the Herald. And there's not a lot of threat on him if he gets on his Disc of Tzeentch. So you grab Metal or Tzeentch, either one's fine. I personally like to just grab the Chromatic Tome and just grab Blue Fire. And then you can cast nearly infinite Blue Fire from the skies. Keep him nice and safe, keep him away from Skink Skirmishers. Another version is you can do all the same stuff, but just grab like Plague of Rust, Searing Doom, or grab just Final Transmutation, I suppose. Those are fine. For now, I'm just going to do my Blue Fire version. Bam, bam, bam. Get rid of all that. Just Chromatic Tome. So now you have a pretty heavy Hero Hammer. These two are going to go chase down whatever dinosaur there is. Herald of Tzeentch just needs to stay safe, stay far away. Ooh, but in case of Shredder... Yeah, okay. Hold on. You should actually do this, because it's about to make the next part of my build a lot better. So, Plague of Rust and Searing Doom, Chromatic Tome, all that stuff. Now, for Skirmish Cav, there it is. So if they do have the Dread Saurian or Mazda Mundi or something, you can Plague of Rust plus the Marauder Horseman's armor shred. You can take off like 70 armor from those things and make them actually quite susceptible to Marauder Horsemen. So you do need that. This is one of the matchups where you want to take some Marauders because they're just going to be fighting Skinks and Skinks suck, or they're going to be fighting big monsters and you don't really want to be too elite into the big monsters. A lot of your shooting is going to be irrelevant. I do like taking the Chromatic Abominations and the Sour Guts because their hybrid melee stats are pretty good against Cold One Riders and Skinks and stuff. But really, I'm taking them for the fire damage because that hard counters whatever the Lizardmen want to do with Rev Crystals or Apotheosis or Regrowth or something. And I didn't take my Blue Fire Caster. So I'm a little limited on ranged fire damage. But you can cut these guys if you're really confident your Marauder Horseman can always get in range. But it's one option I just wanted to throw out there. So Marauder Horsemen can use fire damage to stop any healing shenanigans. We have Plague of Rust and Searing Doom. We have two Duelists. So now what am I worried about? Cold Ones. Got it. Cold One Cavalry is going to be a bit of a snag. So I'm going to grab Screamers. Screamers will be pretty good. And Cold One Cavalry can't catch my Skirmish Cav, so my Skirmish Cav can infinitely kite them out. And Cold One Cav really hates fighting basic Marauders or any infantry of any kind, honestly. So Screamers are most of what I want to use against them up in the sky, and I can just get rear charges on them consistently. I don't want to fight them on the ground. My Centaurs of Tzeentch armor piercing won't be that great versus them, and stat for stat, it's just not going to be a great trade for me. And my Chaos Knights will get eaten alive by Cold Ones on the current patch, so I do like getting my free sky charges with so something like this can work. You can spend the last of your money to upgrade some of these guys. 55 gold now. I don't know, Chevron, something like that. Another thing you could do is cut the Shrieking Sky Rays and grab 2 Chaos Warriors Tzeentch with halberds. And then upgrade one of these to this. So now you still have 5 infantry, but 2 are halberds. You only have 3 screamers. Another thing you can do here. Lisbon matchup, there's a lot you can do, though. You could also Changebringer kite them, but I do worry about that because of skinks. Like basic skink skirmishers, the 425 guys can do a lot of damage to Changebringers, and they'll, you know, you can take 2 chameleon skinks, 4 skink skirmishers. You have 6 360 shooting units just harassing the Changebringers constantly. And yeah, it can be a little sticky, but Lizardmen are one of the rosters you can bring Changebringers into. You do need some air support if you're going to do that to like stop Riperdactyl riders from just running them down. Be wary. All right, that's what I got. Goodbye.
Roar. Subscribe, yes, yes.